A few years back, I found myself working at a small, privately owned restaurant situated on a quaint main street in a tiny, historic community. This restaurant stood out among the locals and tourists due to its diverse menu, offering everything from American cuisine to Indian, Thai, French, and Middle Eastern dishes. This small restaurant had once been a beloved privately owned Chinese restaurant, cherished by the locals. However, the elderly owner who ran it tragically passed away inside the restaurant one day. Consequently, the town's residents did not take kindly to the arrival of a city woman who purchased the restaurant shortly after his death. My former boss, not only flaky and irresponsible but also sometimes came across as curt and rude, faced challenges obtaining the necessary permits to renovate the historic building. To complicate matters, certain renovations in an old building like this triggered local laws that required expensive updates. As a result, she decided to use the staff she had hired, including us, to assist with most of the renovation work. Initially, everything seemed to be proceeding smoothly, with nothing out of the ordinary. That was until one overcast, drizzly day when we gathered in the dining area for a staff meeting. As we sat quietly, listening to the boss, something peculiar occurred. The front entrance door to the restaurant suddenly opened halfway and then closed carefully after a moment, as if someone had entered and left. However, there was no one on the other side since the door was mostly glass, and we would have seen anyone. We exchanged confused glances but attributed it to a breeze, considering that the back door was open, albeit separated by a closed set of kitchen doors. Another strange incident involved a coworker who was at the restaurant alone one night. According to her, shortly after turning a corner past a shelf with tools, an empty cordless drill case flew past her head, narrowly missing her and crashing into the wall. She seemed quite disturbed when she recounted the experience to us in the kitchen the next day. Following these events, sporadic peculiar incidents continued. Our boss occasionally asked us why someone hadn't entered her office when she saw one of us walking by her open door, even though none of us had passed her office during those times. Additionally, we heard faint voices, doors opening or closing unexpectedly, and occasionally, ingredients I had set out for recipes mysteriously disappeared within seconds when I stepped away briefly to grab another item from the back shelf. However, the most terrifying paranormal experience occurred later. To describe this, I need to explain certain aspects of restaurant kitchens. In a typical restaurant kitchen, there is a cook line, a narrow walking or standing space flanked by ovens, fryers, and a cooktop on one side and prep surfaces and small fridges on the other. This leaves a 3 to 4 foot walking aisle forming the cook line. The dishwasher is usually located outside the cook line, with additional fridges, freezers, and other kitchen equipment further away. In this environment, various appliances create a constant ambient background noise. One day, 3 of us were working in the kitchen, my boss and me on the cook line, and another employee on dishwasher duty. Everything was normal until, suddenly, the ambient noise ceased. It was as if an invisible soundproof curtain had fallen over us, plunging us into absolute silence. We exchanged puzzled looks. "What the hell?" I exclaimed. "Why is it so eerily quiet all of a sudden?" questioned the dishwasher, looking suspicious. My boss, too, seemed unsettled. "I don't know," she replied nervously, her voice trailing off. She turned to me, and, standing directly behind her on the narrow cook line, she instructed me to check if the fridges and hood fans were running. "Maybe the power is out," she suggested. I walked a short distance outside the cook line to investigate, and to my surprise, I heard the hood fans, the dishwasher, the hot water heater, and all the fridges and freezers running normally. I returned to my boss and reported that everything was functioning fine. Oddly, as soon as I stepped back onto the cook line to relay this information to her, the silence enveloped us once more. "Well, Nora, get back to work grilling those peppers," she snapped, and I complied. After a few minutes, I began to experience tunnel vision, dizziness, and nausea. I informed my boss, who advised me to step outside for fresh air. I followed her suggestion. While I was outside, I overheard my boss making a phone call from her office, which was diagonally across from the back door, separated only by a screen door. She sounded urgent and shaky as she asked the person on the other end for an abalone shell, sage, and some peculiar oil. It turned out that she needed these items because, according to her, she had sensed something malevolent walk through her on the cook line. The unsettling part was that I had been standing right behind her, inches away on that cook line. I waited until she finished her call and returned to the cook line before re-entering. By that time, everything sounded normal again. As I finished my shift about an hour later, I drove home in record time, taking just under 30 minutes for the usually 45-minute journey. Throughout the night, I struggled to sleep, feeling on edge. When I did manage to drift into slumber, I was abruptly awakened multiple times by terrifying visions of a screaming, demon-like figure right in front of my face. To start off, I am currently a 16-year-old white female, and this happened when I was 9. For context, my mother and father aren't together anymore. They live an hour apart, and I go to my father's house every weekend. He would pick me up from school, take me to the same Chinese restaurant for dinner, and then go home. Well, on one visit to the restaurant, I visited the hibachi area of the restaurant with my plate of raw food. There was a new man working the station than the usual slender Chinese woman. He smiled at me, and being a child, I smiled back. I placed my plate of food on the counter behind everyone else's, not caring about having to wait, but the man grabbed my plate from the back and cooked it quickly. I was curious because there were at least 3 other plates of food in front of mine. I didn't question for long because I just told myself he was probably being nice. The next visit, he did the same thing but winked at me while he did it. I started to grow more troubled by this man. He was at least in his early 40s, and he shouldn't have been giving a child this kind of attention. The third visit was by far the creepiest and one of the scariest things that has happened to me. On the third visit, I stopped going to the hibachi station, but I had to pass it while I headed to the table where I was sitting with my dad. As I turned around to pick up something that I had dropped, I could see behind the hibachi station where I saw the man bending under the counter and blowing me a kiss. I freaked out and ran back to my dad. I told him what happened, and he got worried. We quickly finished eating and we went to pay at the front counter. I was impatient, wanting to leave, so my father gave me the car keys and I headed out to the parking lot. As soon as I left, I saw the man smoking a cigarette leaning against the brick wall of the restaurant. He approached me and started peppering me with questions like, "What's your name? And how old are you?" Hoping he would go away, I told him my name, Arrow. My name interested most people since it was unusual, and this sparked more questions. Annoyed, I told him my dad was waiting for me, and I started to walk away when he grabbed my arm. Fight or flight instantly kicked in, and everything seemed to happen quickly. I know he screamed some obscenities, but I was too focused on making it to the car, so I didn't hear exactly what he said. I ripped my arm from his grip and probably beat the world recorder for fastest runner as I made my way to the car at the end of the parking lot. My dad didn't have a key fob, so I had to manually unlock the car. I ran to the driver's side since it was the closest to me. I unlocked the car and jumped in, slamming the door hard behind me. I pressed the automatic lock button on the door and all the doors clicked as they locked. I turned to see the man at the window beating on it so hard I thought it would shatter. He approached me and started peppering me with questions like, "What's your name? And how old are you?" Next thing I knew, my father was running and yelling at the man. The man saw this and quickly ran off. It took a while for me to calm down. I never saw the man at the restaurant again as we continued to go, even though I don't know why we kept going back. A month later, I found out the man had been fired and had been arrested for sexual harassment of a child and kidnapping. I couldn't believe that could have happened to me. I was 18 years old, living several hours away from home for school, surrounded by a group of unfamiliar girls. I had just landed a job at a fast food place. After my initial training, I was assigned to work the night shift as a maintenance worker, which primarily involved cleaning and changing garbage. The first couple of weeks on the job went smoothly. I was diligent in my work, and as a result, the managers trusted me to handle my responsibilities without supervision. This independence, however, would soon become a problem. Around 2 weeks into my new job, a man began showing up at the restaurant a few times a week, usually around 2 a.m. He would sit in the lobby, typically at a table that was out of view from the cash registers, watching me intently. He often changed seats to ensure that he was always positioned behind me when I was working in that area. At the time, I didn't think much of it and assumed he preferred to stay away from the mop. I frequently worked in that area since it also housed the restrooms and my supply closet, though there wasn't a physical divider separating it from the rest of the section. One night, while retrieving supplies from the closet, I turned around and found the man blocking the exit to the main section of the restaurant, wearing a big grin. I'm a tall woman, standing at 6 feet, and at that time, I had long dark blue hair. The man, who appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, was a skinny black individual, slightly shorter than me. I stared at him for a moment before cautiously asking if he needed any assistance. He responded by asking about my work shifts for the week and my usual days off. Hoping to discourage him, I replied that my schedule wasn't posted yet and that it was unpredictable due to my varying assignments. He casually replied, "That's okay, baby. I'll just wait for you here every night." With that, he returned to his table and continued to gaze at me. Although I felt somewhat uneasy, I didn't initially consider the situation dangerous. However, he kept his promise and began coming in every night, always around the same time. He'd get upset if I hadn't worked the previous night. I confided in my manager, but their response was dismissive, assuring me that he was harmless. As time passed, he somehow learned my exact work schedule, despite its inconsistency from week to week. He would wait for me to start my shift and leave shortly before my shift ended. My coworkers confirmed that he never came in when I wasn't working. At this point, he started bringing 2 friends with him, who were burly men. When they saw me, they would gather in a huddle and engage in conversation. The main man would grab my arm as I walked by, attempting to coerce me into sitting with him or giving him my phone number. Fearful of losing my job, I complied. One night, just before my exams, the man and his friends were sitting in their usual spot. As he grabbed my arm, he inquired about when I would be taking out the garbage that night. My heart sank. Our restaurant had a trash compactor located in a poorly lit, secluded corner of the parking lot. This was a task I frequently performed, and I would be outside for around 15 minutes, with my back turned to the parking lot and the noise of the compactor preventing me from hearing anyone approach. My manager rarely checked on me by this point, and I had gone entire shifts without any communication. Stuttering, I managed to relay my concerns and rushed behind the counter to inform the manager. Once again, I was told not to worry, that the man was harmless and simply friendly. Terrified and frustrated, I asked a male coworker to accompany me while taking out the garbage. I explained everything that had transpired thus far. He advised me to stay inside and promised to handle the task alone, in case the man and his friends were waiting outside. Indeed, they were. When my coworker returned, he told me that they had been hiding in the shadows around the compactor enclosure and had approached him from behind as he tossed the bags inside. The main man had apologized, claiming he had mistaken me for someone else, and they all departed. I was both embarrassed and extremely grateful that my coworker had taken charge. The night manager reprimanded me for seeking assistance with the garbage duty. I pleaded with the morning manager to allow me to swap my remaining shifts with the morning workers, and I quit the job after completing those shifts. Nevertheless, they continued to come into the restaurant every night, searching for me. When I returned to the restaurant on the day I moved back home for the summer, my former coworkers informed me that they still frequented the establishment, inquiring about me and growing upset when informed that I had quit. Apparently, they visited at all hours, hoping to catch me on the premises.